Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Celebrating Comics Victories. I'm Robin Brenner, and I'm the president of the Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few technical details with everyone. A link to today's slide presentation was included in the Zoom 1 hour ago. To download it, please open that email and click on the link located there. You can also download the slides by typing the URLs on this screen into your web browser. If you have any trouble accessing these materials, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a button for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type in your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable the captions on your screen, please look for and click on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select Show or Hide Captions from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Caption Settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may at the discretion of the organizers be immediately removed. And now we are ready to get started with our presentation. So I'm going to take the first slot here, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about the graphic novels and comics roundtable history and a little bit of a timeline, as well as a few recommendations for some classic reprints of titles that we thought we'd recommend to everybody. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to go through a few of some of the major timelines of the graphic novel roundtable, but specifically also just comics and libraries and the way that the two worlds kind of came together. I've been lucky enough to be working in comics and libraries for over 20 years now and have seen a lot of this happen. So it's been fascinating to me to watch it all happen. But one of my first memories is being part of an email listserv called Graphic Novels and Libraries, which is this first note here. And it did indeed feature the tagline, "Hundreds of librarians can't be wrong." So it was a fun community, and it was where a lot of librarians found each other over the years. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see the achievements that kind of started a lot of the paths for a lot of our comics folks who work with libraries. The big landmark thing that happened for a lot of librarians was in 2002, there was the Get Graphic at Your Library pre-conference, which featured Neil Gaiman, Art Spiegelman, Colleen Doran, and Jeff Smith. And these were a huge deal because it was the time that the comics community realized that libraries were taking them seriously, and also that everyone wanted to work together in order to get books on the shelves. So if you keep going to the next slide, then we had a lot of different adjustments over the years. There was the first graphic novel pavilion, which is what we call the graphic novel area on the exhibit floor at ALA Annual. And a lot of the comics librarians worked together to try to make sure that more and more people could find comics in one place. If I recall, this is also the year there were some very entertaining rubber band fights across the little carpeted hallways of the exhibit floor between the comics publishers and creators. But it was a fun beginning because it was, again, when a lot of us found each other, where we got to know the publishers, including comics publishers and book publishers, and started to really connect to figure out what we all needed to make comics a success in libraries. And then if you go to the next slide, I was also a part of one of my first works on a committee for ALA et al. Was to help create the Great Graphic Novels for Teens list, which was one of the first lists. It took us 2 years to get the proposal off the ground, but then it was established, and I was a part of that committee for a number of years. And that was very exciting to see that the units were embracing comics enough to give it a list that would highlight the best of them. And I think it started a trend of graphic novels being considered more and more for all kinds of awards within ALA and outside of ALA. And then if you keep going to the next slide, we had a lot of adventures, of course, where librarians would take what they knew from their own world and bring them out to comics conventions, which are a huge part of the comics world, especially for publishers, but also for fans. And it was a way to connect with those fans and introduce what the library could bring to them. And a natural fit was C2E2, which is in Chicago. And of course, ALA being in Chicago really connected the two groups. And they started doing pop-up libraries and bringing comics to the library floor so people could read them, but we were not publishers, so we weren't selling them. So it was a different way to browse and talk about comics. And C2E2 continues to be one of the conventions that we go to most frequently. And then if you go to the next slide, we did start adding Artist Alley in 2011, which was a way to bring creators to the floor. And we borrowed that from comics conventions because, as any of you who've attended a convention know, there's often a very significant Artist Alley where people can show off their work and you can meet all the creators face to face. And then to have that at ALA was a special kind of treat for all the comics creators, but I think a lot of librarians also found new and upcoming artists that way and could talk directly to creators about things like programs and events and how to connect directly with the creators. So it was an enormous fun to be able to add that, and that's been going ever since at every ALA annual. And then if the next slide. This was when we actually established ourselves as a group of comics folks who worked with within libraries, and it was officially called the Graphic Novel Member Interest Group. And that was just a way to give us a group of people so we knew who to talk to when we were all trying to find each other. And this was exciting because it also crossed all different kinds of libraries. It was school libraries, academic, special, public. Everybody who was working with comics knew that they could learn from each other, but it was a way to connect. And this led to a lot more programming as we kept going forward and making sure we were doing more outreach and providing more resources. So if you go to the next slide. This was the first year we had the Will Eisner Graphic Novel Grants for Libraries, which is sponsored by the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation and continues to this day. They are wonderful grants that help libraries build new collections or start new programs. And that was one of our first major initiatives. And it's something that's still really important to the libraries that receive it every year. And it's one of our kind of great achievements as a roundtable that started a little earlier than now. And then the next slide. The other thing we decided to start, which we continue to do, is if you go to ALA Annual, we started what we call the Friday Forum, which was essentially a free pre-conference for everyone who attended. And it was a series of panels that were brainstormed and coordinated by the roundtable in order to bring in creators and bring all the library folks together to talk about a range of topics, from everything you can think of, from challenges to new kinds of comics to manga and everything that people needed to talk about. And that's another tradition we keep going and keeps growing every year. And in particular, we want to ensure that everybody could get a pre-conference in a way that worked for them, but that we didn't need to charge for. And then you go to the next slide. And we had a couple of things. The next two slides in a row are different ways that we've reached out to other conventions and other organizations. So the first one is the Comic Conference for Educators and Librarians at San Diego Comic-Con. San Diego Comic-Con is still one of the biggest comics conventions in the world, and it was a great way to connect the San Diego Public Library and the Comic-Con together and bring everyone's expertise together in a space. And it was days of panels, which is a longer sequence than we'd ever had before. And then if you go to the next slide, I believe the next one is New York Comic-Con as well, and the New York Public Library. And that partnership was full of GNCRT members, but also was an initiative specific to the New York Public Library and was another really strong way to connect to Comic-Cons and comics publishers with the library world. And then if you go to the last slide, this one is the final of our timeline that we created recently to talk about our own history. That was when the roundtable was actually established. And the exciting part of that is that we had a little more kind of clout, a little more official status so that we can do even more things. And then the rest of the webinar today is actually going to be about a lot of the things that we've done since then, since the establishment of the roundtable and all the work that we've done to try to help library workers across the world in order to create great comics collections and be advocates for the format. So the next few, I just wanted to go through a few recommendations. Since I was thinking about comics history and libraries, I was thinking about recommending some of the classic titles that maybe have gone out of print or aren't as available anymore. So I'm just going to quickly go through a few to alert you all. So there's some interesting reprints coming out. So first off, if you haven't seen these already, Penguin Classics and Marvel teamed up to do collections of the classic superhero characters. And they're based around characters, so they tell you about the kind of significant stories from the early publication history of a lot of these heroes. But what I thought was especially appealing for a lot of especially young readers are things like having folks like Jason Reynolds and Jean Luen Yang discuss in forewords the effect of the characters and the impact of the characters on their work and on their lives. So those are really wonderful additions. As many of you may know, Marvel often lets things go out of print, so it's nice to be able to get the more classic collections. And then if you go to the next slide, this one is for all the children's librarians out there who have to deal with those giant paperbacks of Calvin and Hobbes that always flop around and cause all sorts of kind of damage. There's a new edition coming out that's the portable edition, and these are about 6 inches by 9 inches, so they're going to be a lot smaller and a lot easier to shelve. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew everyone should have Calvin and Hobbes, but I was excited to see a smaller format. And then if you go to the next one, for those of you who would like classics comics, or if you have patrons who are really interested in looking back at the history of comics, there's a few collections here I wanted to just note were coming out. The EC Archives is from the early days of comics, and this in particular, this one is about war stories, but it is about from the kind of 1950 and 1951 and features a lot of really excellent creators from that era of comics. And the archives are just really wonderful as a document of where comics come from and the kind of history that we have here in the US. And then if you go to the next one, this is a personal one. I just feel like I had to throw in there. I grew up reading a lot of manga as a librarian, not as a teen. And Tokyo Babylon was one of the first that I remember reading and loving as a reader, and they're re-releasing it from Yen Press in a new Clamp Premium collection. I'm anticipating there'll be more Clamp titles coming, but it was nice to have a new edition of a classic manga series. And then the next one is Hip Hop Family Tree, which is one that I just, today is actually officially, like unofficially the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And I always feel like everyone should know about this series of titles, and getting it all in one giant collection is really wonderful. It's from Fantagraphics, and it's an extraordinary work of just the entire history of the whole art form. This is everything together in one book. So it has extra material that wasn't published in the original single volume editions, plus a lot of annotations from Ed Piskor himself. And then the last two are a couple of classics. So the Dauntless Dames is Trina Robbins and Peter Maresca, but Trina Robbins is probably best known as a historian of comics and specifically about women in comics. And this is her latest collection that's all about women from the 30s to the 50s and the characters that existed at that time. So it's a new one to pick up from her that will undoubtedly be great. And then the last one is from legendary creator Darwyn Cooke, who we lost way too soon in 2016. But this is the full Richard Starks Parker collection that he ran multiple Eisners for, and is just a really gorgeous adult collection. So all of these are ones you should look for and pick up, especially if you have people interested in the history of comics, or if you just know that folks are going to be excited to see some of these stories coming back. So that's the end of my little history and a few classics to recommend. And then we're going to move on now to talking about the graphic novels and comics travel grant. So I'm going to pass this off to Shira and Gabe.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually going to go on camera because this is the only slide for this section. So you can look at my face instead, and looks like Gabe is on camera too.
Hello.
So if you haven't heard, in 2023, GNCRT secured and executed the first ever Comics Librarian Conference travel grant, allowing GNCRT to select and fund 2 new up-and-coming comics librarians to attend their first ever ALA annual conference. So basically, I'm going to share the bios of both Gabe, who is present today, and the other winner who is unfortunately unable to make it. And then we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A with Gabe to talk about his experience. And then I'm going to share a couple quotes from the other winner. So first of all, Gabriel Lopez is a research and instruction librarian for the Sultanfuss Library at Our Lady of the Lake University. He spearheaded the creation of a graphic novels collection on his campus and serves as its selector. He's a member of the GNCRT Addressing Comic Book Challenges Committee and is set to graduate this summer with his MLIS. Did you already graduate?
Finished.
Yay!
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And if you haven't watched the responding to challenges before, during, and after, I highly recommend them. Gabe was one of the panelists on one of those webinars, and those are available on the GNCRT site. So the other winner is Avi Netzorg-Wuntner, who has focused their career on equitable and reparative knowledge organization to facilitate access to resources and stories for all. They are the Public and Technical Studies Librarian at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and prior to this position, they volunteered as co-coordinator for the Vancouver, BC Community Queer Library, Out on the Shelves. Avi served on the selection committee for the GNCRT's 2022 Best Graphic Novels for Adults reading list. So let's get started with the questions. So Gabe, where did you hear about the travel grant and what made you want to apply for it?
I first heard through the travel grant through my work with the committee to address bans and challenges, and I, received email notifications about it. And it was kind of, as I looked at it, I kept thinking to myself, I couldn't possibly win. This isn't going to happen. And then just kind of last minute, I said, you know what? The best thing to do is to just go for it and see what happens. So it was a wonderful surprise to have been awarded the grant and be able to go to ALA.
That's wonderful. So can you describe your experience with other comics library folks and the programming you attended at ALA Annual?
I wish I had all the time in the world to explain how wonderful it was. It was really fantastic. I mean, one of the most meaningful things was being able to meet face-to-face with so many people from GNCRT that I'd been working with or just kind of talking with and meeting with regularly on the committee, but also putting names to faces that you see. So I'm still kind of new to comic scholarship. Since I've been working with the committee, I've been more invested, and I see these names like Robin, Armoni, and just being able to meet them and talk to them face to face. And Amy was just a wonderful guide through that world. Amy Wright was just wonderful, leading me through everything and being helpful and kind of giving me guidance through all of that. It was really wonderful. And on the flip side of that, just meeting to meet some of the creators. I got to meet some heroes of mine. I got to meet and talk to Sina Grace, which was just like a highlight of the whole situation, but also a lot of other queer writers and creatives that was just really meaningful for me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, it was wonderful. It was fantastic.
So what was your biggest takeaway from the whole experience? And you could talk about attending the conference or applying for the grant and, whatever aspect of it.
I think one of the biggest takeaways, I think just from attending ALA in general, is just realizing how close we are in the library profession, how people, just from meeting the members of the GNCRT and the creatives, just the librarians you meet, you're sharing an Uber getting from your hotel to the conference site, or you're just kind of standing and talking. It's just really how quick we are to help each other and to talk to each other and to just kind of bring this sense of community together. And sure, there's there's kind of little specialties and people have their pockets in their communities. But I think overall, just that sense of community was just really wonderful, especially because it's so many people from so many walks of life, from all across the country, just kind of working together. it was really wonderful.
That's great. You know, I do think that occasionally people have maybe less welcoming experiences, and I'm so glad to hear that you had a very welcoming experience. And I don't mean with GNCRT, but I mean with conferences in general.
Yeah.
Sometimes people, especially with social anxiety, feel a little uncomfortable, and I like to think that GNCRT does a really good job. The conference committee did a really good job making spaces for those sort of more introverted kinds of experiences and the more extroverted ones as well. So
yeah, and I do, like, you know, I do have my fair share of social anxiety, but also just having the lounge available was nice, because we got a chance to kind of work a couple of shifts. So just even speaking to librarians who were just starting a comics collection in their libraries, and just having that one-on-one time was really great. But there was also like one-on-one time with the individual creators and writers, and you know, even that was just wonderful because it was a little bit more quiet, a little bit more subdued. I mean, but the floor in general is like an overwhelming experience because there's so many people. But I just found that even the vendors were nice and welcoming, and kind of gave you that time to do a little bit more one-on-one. And if you needed time to kind of walk away, you could do that as well.
yeah, yeah, nice thing about the lounge, definitely, to be able
Yeah.
to get some space and have quiet huddles and such.
Mhm.
So the last question is, what would you say to other library workers who might be considering applying for this grant in the future?
Do it. Just, you know, you know, take the time, do it, ask the questions if you need to ask the questions. I'm the first librarian from my library to be able to attend ALA. We're a small library on a small private campus. So just having that opportunity to do it was, I mean, it was wonderful. It was special. And I, you know, don't be afraid, you know, try it, and just know that you can have a varying array of experiences, but you can also tailor it to meet your specific needs. But just the chance to kind of meet and talk with everybody, some of your heroes, you're going to run into them, and just the experience itself is worth it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gabe. Um,
Yes.
so now I'm just really quickly going to share a couple quotes from Avi's response to their experience at ALA. So I'm going to speak in first person because I'm directly quoting, but obviously this was not my experience, this was Avi's. So my time at ALA Annual was packed with panels, events, and wandering the exhibit hall. I was able to explore a number of topics that I'm passionate about, namely tech services, social justice, and of course, comics. My favorite moments included the ALA Lounge huddle on comic and graphic novel metadata, the Stonewall Book Awards, the panel on manga for POC teens, and a variety of programming on critical cataloging. And then they said, I learned so much at ALA. This was my first conference after library school, and the experience was greatly improved by my new perspective now that I have a few years of professional experience. This was especially true with cataloging and metadata programming, where I learned many practical solutions to issues I have had as a solo cataloger, and learned about ways my colleagues have approached DEI in metadata. I came away with so much information to share with the IAIA library about cataloging and programming for students on subjects like Indigenous knowledge, comics and graphic novels, zines, and more. And then, similar to what Gabe said, when asked, what would you tell someone who was considering applying for this grant next year? They said, I would definitely encourage them to apply. This is a great opportunity for someone early in their career to participate in ALA, get a bit of a look behind the scenes, and meet some wonderful people. So hopefully somebody in this audience today will be inspired to apply for the grant.
Definitely, yeah.
And I think we're now on to Taylor, if you're able to put the slides back up. Yes, thank you.
All right, so next we're going to be talking about the Best Graphic Novels for Adults reading list. My name is Casey Wilson, and I'm here with two other members of our committee. We've been working this year on the 2023 list to read a lot of graphic novels, get some nominations going, and evaluate them for possible inclusion on the list. But today what we really want to do is to give you a little bit of background and behind the scenes look at what this process looks like. And so our list basically highlights the best graphic novels for adults published each year. Some of the goals of the reading list are to increase awareness of graphic novels. We really want to assist libraries of all types in developing high quality graphic novel collections. And finally, what we're really trying to do is also to highlight the voices of individuals who have been historically underrepresented in comics publishing. And so we can move on to the next slide. So first off, in our process of nominating and selecting graphic novels, we have several criteria that we always keep in mind. So the first one is audience. As the title might suggest, it's really important that the themes and content of every title on the list appeal to an adult audience. And so for us, that means ages 19 and up. We really are trying to make sure that we include graphic novels for a variety of applications because adults are interested in lots of different graphic novels. And so while some might be more oriented toward leisure reading, others may be more educational in nature, and all are totally valid for the list. We also are always considering both the quality of the artwork and the quality of storytelling. Since we're looking at graphic novels, both of these are super important, and we're really looking for both of them to be outstanding in each of the graphic novels that we select. It's important that there's a clear flow across panels and pages from the artwork perspective, and we really want the writing to work in conjunction with the artwork to convey meaning to readers and really just enhance the overall narrative. In terms of quality of publication, we do consider both print books and ebooks. We're always looking for there to be either like no printing errors or few printing errors. And specifically with ebooks, we also want to make sure that they are easy to use and to navigate for readers. And finally, we have diverse representation. Since one of the goals of the reading list is to highlight the voices of diverse creators, we give extra consideration to works that are by and about underrepresented communities. What we're really looking for here are works where authentic identities and experiences are really centered in the story so that those communities are really given a voice. And now we can move to the next slide.
So I can jump in here. So we wanted to highlight that one of the great things about this is that anyone can nominate books for our consideration. So this is really something where we are all looking for books ourselves, but also considering books that we receive as nominations. And the specific rules for nomination are available on the website, but mostly anybody can nominate something that meets our criteria as long as they aren't themselves the creator of the item or the publisher. Next slide, please. So this is the nomination form. It is available on the Roundtable's website, and you can also scan this QR code. And anybody, as I mentioned, can nominate things. And this is the case every year. So if you think in the future for something for next year, you can also always go back to the website and there'll be a current form for you to nominate books. Next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit about how we track what we read. So I'm using examples from last year since we wanted to keep everything about what we're considering for this year private. Basically, each person keeps a reading log, and that's how we track what we read. I only snipped a piece of it, but it would also include things like our notes about why we think it's good or not good. It would include whether or not we plan to nominate it or whether we're voting yes on it, that sort of information in additional cells. And this is really our personal tracking device for everything we read, whether we read it because someone's nominated it or because we found the book ourselves. Next slide. And then we have the shared tracking template, and this allows us to track what the committee as a whole is doing. Again, just a portion of this is snipped, but beyond this information about the book itself, it also includes information about who's voting yes or no on it, who nominated it. And this is where we would also find out about things that have been nominated from the public so that we can then go and review and evaluate them ourselves. Next slide. Oh, okay. So now we're into this part. Sorry about that. So this is my book that I liked. I just wanted to talk about how, we were each going to talk about a book that we really enjoyed, and I like this one, The Night Eaters. I've always really liked these creators' books, but this one was a real surprise for me because it really is a horror book, which isn't normally something I appreciate, but the artwork's just gorgeous. So I definitely recommend it.
And we can go to the next slide. So this is my first year on the committee, but one of the titles that I was really excited to see on the 2022 list was Lore Olympus, which publishes weekly as a webcomic on the Webtoon app, but now has these really awesome print volumes where it's been being collected. So this is also kind of a 2-for-1 special because both the first and second volumes were included on the list, so more to love. Lore Olympus is basically a modern retelling of traditional myths from Greek mythology, focusing on the tale of Persephone's abduction into the underworld. There's really just a lot to love about this series. One thing that I think really stands out is this is just a really great example of kind of an adaptation of a webcomic into a print format because it is completely beautiful regardless of whether you're scrolling through a screen to read it or flipping the pages of the beautiful print volumes. The artwork is dynamic, very colorful, as is shown on the screen right now. You can see on the cover, each kind of one of the Greek deities has like a very unique color palette. So Persephone's in pink and Hades is in blue. I also think that Smith manages to make traditional stories relevant for a modern audience by embedding aspects such as college classes and parties and social media, while also giving all these really relevant facts from the Greek myths. So whether you're new to Greek mythology or wanting to experience the original myths in a new way, the series is a really fun and engaging way to do that. And it also has just a great mix of drama, comedy, romance, so a little bit of something for everyone. I highly recommend it. And we can go to the next slide.
Okay, I'm Joe. I am also a first-year member of this committee, so still kind of getting my sea legs underneath me. But a book I've really enjoyed over the past couple of years would be Frieren Beyond Journey's End. That is a title that won a major award in Japan, the Manga Taisho. It's published by Viz Media. At the start of the series, this kind of fantasy capital is celebrating the triumphant return of this 4-hero party that has defeated the quote Demon King, and it's reigned in a new age of peace. So the story starts with the great adventure already over. So what happens the rest of the way is kind of a very cerebral manga where our main character Frieren, she is an elf mage and she has a much longer lifespan than her peers. She is already 1,000+ years old, even though she looks very youthful. So one by one, people that she's known in her past are dying. She's outliving them. And Frieren really begins to ponder the concepts of death and mortality. It's an emotional, beautiful read. Really enjoyed it. Seems like other people do as well. Frieren Beyond Journey's End.
And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide.
Hello, everybody. My name is Carrie Merritt, and this is actually my 3rd year on the Best Graphic Novel for Children. I'm actually the chair this year for the 2023. I'm going to be covering some of the same ideas that for the adults, but ours is a little bit different for the kids. So to start with, when we start looking at graphic novels and what we're going to be reading and what we're going to be looking at, one of the first things we have to do is locate the titles. This gets a little tricky sometimes with certain things. First, we have the same publishing criteria that adult does. So for this year, for example, we can look at books that are published September 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2023. We have that 3-month overlap, which is fantastic. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that the publication date is great. Then we have to look at age, and age becomes really important when you start talking about graphic novels for children. So our age range is 5 to 12, and that 12-year age can get a little tricky. Most of the time, publishers are wonderful. We get those, they have that age range, and sometimes they have a grade level, which can be a little confusing. You do have 5-year-olds who are in TK, and you do have 12-year-olds who can be going into 7th grade. So our committee really tries to look at that age and use the grade as that, oh, is this really appropriate or not? Let's go look at that and compare and contrast that. One of the reasons why it's important is this year, this has happened twice to us. We have read an incredible graphic novel that was absolutely amazing. We've nominated it, we've discussed it, we even did a preliminary vote on it. And then we find out that the publisher and or marketing department has switched it from 12 to 14 years of age to 14 plus. That's immediately YA. And that is not something we look at. So we've had 2 titles so far this year, actually 3 as of yesterday, that have become ineligible because obviously our list is for elementary schools. And the last thing that we want to do is put a title on our list that there's no way an elementary school or the juvenile section at a public library will have in their selection. So that's a really important thing. The other one is just to make sure that something has not been nominated before. We had a few of those this past year when somebody wasn't quite sure what they were doing and they kind of nominated 3 or 4 that were on our list previously. So we have to look at all of that. We also have an incredible spreadsheet like the adults do that talk about all the titles, the year they're published, how much it is, the whole 9 yards. We can keep track of everything. And we, of course, have our nominating section. Now, this is really important. Like the adults, anybody can nominate unless you're related to the book somehow, publisher, author. So we will get people who love to nominate. They will send their book in, but we still need that first reader, and that's up to our committee. We get in there, we try to read every single book that's nominated, seconded, and then have our lovely discussions. And then we do a kind of like a soft vote. And that soft vote is just saying yes, no, maybe. I have a lot of maybes. And the reason for that is there are some that I see some great merits in. I'm like, oh my gosh, this art is amazing. It's fantastic. I love the story. And then I'll have a couple who have some concerns and I'll be like, oh, I kind of need to go back and reevaluate that. I've also had some where I'm like, oh, it took me 30 minutes to read 10 pages. I'm like, this is all bad. And then all these people come up with these merits and I'm like, okay, I need to set this aside and I need to reread this with fresh eyes. So I love my committee because it has allowed me at my library to have a very strong graphic novel selection for my patrons, which I absolutely love. And I don't feel bad at all letting the local school district know, hey, these are the ones you want, because I know it's being checked out locally. Then we rediscuss at the end of the year. I'm sure the adults do this all the time. We are constantly like, yes, we read this 10 months ago. Yes, we need to reevaluate this again, especially after everything we've discussed. And we have our final vote. Now, our final vote, as easy as it seems, we really, really want to get those titles out there that are not just a really good read. You know, the kids are going to check it out, the readers are going to check it out, but you want to make sure that the art is incredible, that it is hitting the diverse population, that we are being inclusive, that the book itself is not going to fall apart after the second read. That I know how important that is to schools. It is so, so, so important to schools that they have a very limited budget. They really need to be able to have books that are solid. And so when we look at that final vote, we are looking at absolutely everything. When we first start reading our books, we are getting digital copies, we are getting PDFs. Sometimes we get physical copies, but when we are going to our final vote, we have to have that physical copy in our hand. We really need to see the texture of the pages, the quality of the pages. The art can also be very different from the digital copies to the physical copies. So we want to check out every single aspect of that book. And so then we do our final vote. And next slide, please. So then we get our announcement of our top 10, which it's very exciting. I really want to thank the GNCRT this year. They did a great video announcing of the 2022 Best Graphic Novels for Children. We, as a committee, all got to participate. We got to pretend to look at the top 10 list and then hand it off to the next person. And it went through, you know, across obviously the country, and then ended up with the curtains opening with the top 10. Now, I know this will go on in our journals and go online. The other thing that I do is I take the top 10 and I actually go into Canva and I create a medium-sized poster, I would really say medium-sized poster. And I'll put the pictures of each of the graphic novels and I'll say our top 10 for, in this case, 2022, and I'll put it on display. And that will allow our patrons to go over there and see the newest and what they consider the best graphic novels for that year. Next slide. And I'm going to show you the one that I really enjoy because I can't talk about what we're talking about this year. But last year, one of my favorites was Frizzy. From the cover to the back page, the art was just very eye-catching. I had so many people who just picked it up, just wanted to know what this book was all about. The art was very consistent. The paneling was really nicely done. We had our small panels, our big panels, our splash pages. We had text bubbles here and there, but we also had the art that told the story itself. As you can see in this first panel, I mean, she's just thinking, a young reader's going to look at that and say, oh, I've been there. I've had to think about this before. And of course, the plan, where she's just, again, just thinking and trying to figure out, how does she belong? Where does she belong? And how can she be who she wants to be while still respecting her culture, her family? So if you have not read Frizzy yet, I would really recommend it. And you can kind of see what the Best Graphic Novels for Children committee is actually looking for. And again, why we picked this particular one to be one of the top 10 in general. And for me, that is it.
Okay, thank you very much, Carrie. This is Robin again, and I'm going to invite everyone to come on camera. I will do the same, and we'll have a little discussion of some of our best comics victories and things that have happened this year that have made everything worth it. I think for comics library workers across the country. I'm going to start with a very simple one, which is that we have a new Discord this year for the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable that everyone can join. You don't have to be a member in order to join. But just watching the growing community there and the discussions that have happened. And in particular, we wanted to talk about, the positives today, but it's been a rough year, as we all know, rough few years for comics, especially when it comes to challenges and dealing with a lot of harshness, shall I say, to librarians and library workers and collections. But one of the things that made me really heartened was to see people in the Discord really supporting each other and coming out to help everybody figure out how to fight challenges, how to come together and get some support, and also just to have a place to vent and to be able to feel supported and kind of given practical advice as well as just emotional support. So that's been really great for me to see this year with the roundtable. But anyone else want to go?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the best parts of being on this committee is hearing other people and what they are reading, and thus, picking up titles I maybe wouldn't ordinarily pick up. Kind of broadens my reading, so to speak. Behind the scenes, we couldn't show this on the slides, but we do have a graphic novel reading tracker as part of our committee, and that's a way for us internally to see what other committee members are reading and how to access it. So yeah, absolutely nice to talk to other comic readers and evaluators around the country and see what they enjoy. And, thus then I pick it up and maybe I enjoy it as well.
So even in the face of all of these bans, our comics collection is still relatively new. This is going into about the second full year that we've had it. And especially with LGBTQIA plus comics, specifically coming under bans and challenges. I just ran a report for this year's checkouts, and very happy to say Heartstopper, the entire series, is one of our highest checkouts. We've also opened up our comics collection to ILL, and so we're starting to see LGBTQIA comics go out through that as well, which I just think is wonderful here in Texas. They are specifically going under ban, so being able to have those go out, especially in LGBTQIA comics like I Hate This Place, that was one of the first ones to go out, and so I was like super excited for that. So I just want to keep up that work, and if we can offer an avenue for people who can't necessarily get those comics, I just think we're doing the good work.
I'll go next because mine is kind of related. So I'm on the Stonewall Youth and Teen Award Committee, and it's just reading queer like the vast majority of comics I've read this year have been queer comics that are specifically written for young people, and they're so good. And I just, there have been good queer comics for kids for a long time. Skim by Mariko and Jillian Tamaki is one of my all-time favorites still, but it's nice to see how much more there is and how much other great stuff there is, and kind of the increase in publishers that specifically work on publishing those materials, like Abrams imprint Shirley Books by Mariko Tamaki, for instance. So that's cool.
I can go next. So this is my second year being on the best graphic novels for adults list. And I think for me, it has really given me an opportunity to read more widely. So like a really good example of that, I think, is that I'm not a huge horror fan myself, but getting the push to read that genre from other people nominating things helped me to identify some books. The one I said was my favorite from last year's list happened to be horror, actually. And that also, I think, made me better at developing a collection for my library, because it's not to say that I wouldn't have suggested them in the past, but I didn't know them as well. And now that's given me a chance to really read more widely and hear suggestions from so many other librarians working in this area. And that allows me to suggest, what we should have in our collection and better share it with our students too.
I can go now. So the committee has been a really great experience. Like I said, this is my first year on it. And at the academic library I was working at recently, I was able to really expand on the graphic novel collection. So that was a lot of great information for that. When I got there, there were a few volumes of Calvin and Hobbes, and that was it, which is great, but now they have a lot more stuff. And we also got to expand on comics programming, which was really fun for me. So for example, back in May, we participated in the Free Comic Book Day Library Partner Program. And there just so happened to be a children's book festival in my town hosted on the same day. So we actually set up a table at that event. I had a lot of great comics for kids and teens come in that this past year, which was awesome. And we handed out comics to kids and their families all day. And there were a lot of really great moments. Kids were super excited about their comics. My favorite one was this mother who told me that her and her daughter were very excited to go home and read the comic that she had selected that night, and it was going to be her very first comic. And her mom grew up loving comics, but they hadn't introduced them to her child yet. It was very sweet and really cool as an academic librarian who normally works with adults and faculty, which is great, but I love to get to be a small part of a kid's experience with comics as well.
I will follow from Casey here, talking about that, about their first comic. I think one of the best things I've done this year is really changed parents' minds about comics, because they're like, oh, no, 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 they're not real books. And I'm like, excuse me, what do you mean they're not real books? So they don't have words in them? Well, no, no, they have words, but they have pictures. So what are picture books? You know, and they're kind of, oh, okay. And I said, you do understand, and this is where I get them, that you have two panels. And then in between that panel is what we call the gutter. And everything you've taught your child, everything you've taught your reader, your culture, your community, all of your beliefs go into that gutter right there, because the panels, they don't connect. They're not like us. They have to connect them. That child, your reader, is connecting those panels, and everything that you have taught them, everything you have said, everything goes into that gutter. And they're like, oh, and all of a sudden, like, well, why don't you try one? And I'm like, yes. And the kids are like, but I still want a chapter book. And I'm like, that's great. I can show you some great chapter books that go along with this and mix it. And that's, I've been getting a lot more parents like accepting, oh, you know, these are great. I'm like, yeah, they are. Give your reader the chance to read these. And I bet you they're going to come ask you questions, and it opens dialogue.
Well, I'm going to share as well. This is a more personal story, and I will try not to cry. But one thing I did want to mention, by the way, is especially for the folks that are coming from the list committees, is that ALA annual, we did have bookmarks that are for the top 10s of each of the lists. And we are currently investigating the best way to get those out to everybody, so that everybody would be able to have access to the bookmarks through us. So look for that, everyone, because with that soon we will have a way to get those out to you, because I think they'd be super helpful in a library to just have them on bookmarks. I know in my library bookmarks just go out like hotcakes, so we might as well. But I just wanted to share one personal story that happened this year that was super delightful and is the kind of thing I think librarians kind of live for. Is that I was in my teen room, and this was still when we were actually still wearing masks most of the time in the library. And there was a young man who came in with their friend, and we're walking around and talking about, oh, I used to go over there and I used to go over there, and look, they still have all the manga over here. And we're kind of wandering around. And then I was like, oh, can I help you with anything? Are you looking for anything? And they're like, no, I used to come here all the time. I just wanted to look around and show my friend. And then I said, oh, wait a minute. Well, when were you here? And they said, oh, like 2009 to 2014. And that was when I was also still here. I just went, oh, wait, I was here then, and then I took off my mask, and it turned out that it was one of the young teens from the manga and anime club that I ran for over 10 years. And he got very excited and was just like, I can't believe you're still here. I can't believe you're still here. You changed my life. And he's working in animation because he learned about comics and specifically manga and anime from the club. But he's also, it's the classic sort of, he's grown up. And I remember him as a very small, kind of sheltered, homeschooled kid who was a little unsure of himself. But he's all, very confident, and he is now out and proud in Los Angeles, and was crediting us as a club with the place where he found himself and found his passion. So it's just one of those wonderful things that, working especially in a public library, we don't always know who we affect or what their effect is after they've gone off to do other things. So that was one of my favorite experiences this year, because it was wonderful to see him again and make sure, that he's all doing good out there in the world. And that he went into the industry made me really excited to know that he'd end up somewhere creating stories as well. So I thought I'd share that just as a thing we all like to hear someday, and it doesn't happen that often. So, but is there anything else that anyone wanted to share? Are we good? Okay. The other thing I will say that I'm going to go a little bit into some of the things that are happening with the roundtable that are coming up. One of the most exciting things that we were able to establish this year as a first-time committee is we have what's called an awards exploratory committee. So we are currently, that committee this year will be looking into the possibility of creating an award for graphic novels. So that's obviously a little different than selection lists, but in a similar train. And we're just all very excited about that possibility. That we've talked about that the entire time I've been working with comics and libraries, is wondering about an award and what would it look like and what would it encompass and who would give it and how would it look and like all the things that come into that. So that's why we decided this year to really start that discussion. Who knows how long it will take to actually figure all that out, because a lot of work goes into figuring all the criteria, as you've all were talking about. There are a lot of things that go into making the best selections and making sure that the framework is really strong so that you have everything you want on the other side of it. But we're all very excited about that possibility coming up. And then on top of that, there are a lot of webinars and resources that have come up this year. I think the other thing I wanted to mention this year especially was the Metadata and Cataloging Committee released their best practices document for cataloging and classification for graphic novels. And that is a huge, huge resource for anybody that's struggling to figure out how to best catalog graphic novels, how to make sure that your patrons can find them, and all the various levels of I think of it as an art form cataloging, to be perfectly honest. And I think they did a really flexible job of looking into all those questions and coming up with all different kinds of answers for people, which was just a huge resource. And I'm very, that's the kind of committee that I think people don't necessarily think will have like a blockbuster publication over the course of a year, but they did. So I wanted to shout them out as well. And then the other thing, oh, sorry, the light just went off in this room, so I look like I'm in a goth now. There we go. But the other thing I did want to mention as well was just the idea that we do have a lot of resources on the website, and I'll bring the slides back up just so y'all can see the resources that we have. But just for the basics, the website there is the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable, and everything is at that one site. So you'll find all the resources underneath that, all of the different webinars, all of the different lists, everything is there for you to kind of explore and find. And in particular, I wanted to make sure folks know that the webinars about challenges, which have been a great sequence of that Gabe was talking about, are really excellent. And I'm sure there is more to come, but there have also been a lot of other webinars this year that are all different kinds of resources. And we're looking to make sure that we get all of those out there as well, for everyone as much as accessible as possible so that people can find them. And then that link there that you can see there on the bottom of the slide is to join our Discord that I mentioned earlier. So if you'd like to find just a very kind of relaxed community, I would say, of comics library workers that can all offer all different kinds of advice, from silly things to exciting things, all there in the Discord, and that's becoming our main community site. So that's the main way to go and find other folks. And also, if you just ever want to ask about what it's like to be a member of the Roundtable, what the different committees are like, there are a lot of folks in there that could help you understand what that is to sign up to do and what kind of thing will happen there. I did want to thank everybody, all of you panelists. You did an amazing job. I know it's hard to figure out how to cram all this into an hour, but I think we've done a good overview of all the things that are exciting this past year. And I think that's everything for this slide. So if we want to go to the next one, I wanted to make sure to remind everyone as well that Booklist has their Graphic Novels in Libraries Month supplement, which is out now, and it is free and open to everybody on the Booklist website, so you can follow that link and find it. We work a lot as the Roundtable with Booklist to do a lot of articles and things from all of different members, so it's always exciting to get to partner and help with that. And then I think we are all set for today. So thank you very much for attending today. I hope you found something inspiring or useful today. And I wanted to thank everyone one more time for being here and participating in the presentation. And all the graphic novels and comics folks out there. I hope this will be useful, and to see you either in the Discord or in the roundtable. And thank you very much. This concludes the webinar, and I'll see you all soon.